Okay, and so now I'd like to invite Dr. Wang to share his thoughts on research and insights for sun protection across multicultural patient populations. Dr. Wang?
Oh, thanks, Barbara, for including me and to join to this conference. So historically, when we think about photo protection, when we talk to a patient about photo protection, we tend to sort of focus on Caucasian individuals, and mainly because they're the ones who are at risk for developing sunburn and as well as skin cancer. And just judging based on the survey, we've shown that most of us know that sun protection and discussion about photo protection is important across all ethnicities. And the reason is actually relatively simple, because one, sunburn incidence across all ethnicities. You can see individuals across a wide range of ethnicities get sunburned. And this is a study that's published by Holman. They surveyed about 31,000 subjects, and they show that 42% of the white Caucasians reported to have sunburn versus 13, 29, 24% in the Black, Hispanic, and the other races. But what is really interesting is the gray bar area. And they subdivided the population depending on ethnicities that show that there are individuals in each of the ethnic groups, they are reported to have sun-sensitive individuals. And that's defined by individuals get sunburned after 1 hour of unprotected sun exposure. And you can see the numbers for African-American Hispanics jumped significantly much, much higher, 38, 43% compared to the baseline. Now, at the same time, we recognize skin cancer is a major risk. And, in every year in the US, 5 million Americans get treated for skin cancer, cost the healthcare system about $8 billion, 9,000 deaths due to melanoma alone. Now, if you look at the incidence of all skin cancers, obviously the non-Hispanic whites has highest incidence, accounts about 31 per 100,000, but you can still see that in Hispanic, about 5 per 100,000, 2, 1.9 for Asian and Black, and the American Indians is a little bit higher. And it's also very interesting to point out that the Asians, Hispanic, African American, and sometimes the skin cancer is really not related to sun, because 50% of those skin cancers found in area that's not exposed to sun. And so this is actually a very important point. I'm going to bring it back and later on in the presentation. Now, when you look at melanoma incidence rate, this incidence rate matches that of what we've seen with across all type of skin cancer. But what is interesting is if you look at the SEER data showing the survival rate for melanoma, you're seeing that non-Hispanic white Caucasian do a lot better, a 92% survival in 5 years compared to 83 Hispanic, 66 African Americans, 72 Asians, and American Indians. So there's a number of explanations. One is access to care. And second is because of the low incidence rate, Asians, African American, and also the Hispanics perhaps are not aware of the risk. And so they get the skin cancer, the melanoma they get and get detected much later. They have higher breast cell thickness, advanced stage disease. But also there's also another important role, that is the anatomic location. And Asians, African American tend to have a more, let's say, agrose melanomas, and there are real biological differences that influence the survival. That factor that cannot be ignored. Now, if you move forward to the next slide, now when we talk about photo protection, how to counsel patient, we also have to understand a little bit about the different thinking process of what each group is doing right now. What's the similarities? Across the board, despite decades of education in educating everyone about the importance of sun protection for preventing skin cancer, photoaging, we've seen that 34% of US adults still get sunburned at least once a year. And 3 out of 10 routinely report to use any kind of form of sun protection, and men tend to do a lot worse than women. Across all ethnic groups, men just don't really care. It's a really, really difficult group to reach. Now, if you delve a little bit deeper, looking at other ethnic groups, you find some interesting insights. First, African American, you see 31% report to engage in at least one form of sun protection. So that number matches, the general population, 3 out of 10 adults. But what is really interesting is that 63% reported that never used a sunscreen, and they twice likely to say they don't need to wear sunscreen. So there's various reasons why, and this insight will help us to understand how do we penetrate, how do we convince that group to use sunscreen. And one of the reasons may have to do with the biological and the biology. That is, sunscreen works by absorbing the UV light, and the first law of thermodynamics basically says energy is conserved. The UV filters in the sunscreen absorbs all the UV light, but the energy is delivered and transferred into heat. And the heat is something that is bothered, that doesn't liked by some of the African American population, and just that's perhaps one of the reasons they don't like to use it. Now, if we're shifting gears toward the Hispanics, and we tend to think Hispanics, as a one single entity, but in reality, they are a heterogeneous composed of various subgroups. And when we talk about that aspect in relationship to the photoprotection, something else interesting happens. The country origin actually matters. And studies have shown that the Mexican Hispanics tend to use more sun protection behavior compared to the Central South American Hispanics. And if Hispanic individuals who speaks English during their daily routine versus someone who speaks Spanish, it's shown that the ones that speaks English tend to use more sunscreen. So those are the interesting insights that have to be taken into account. Now, what are the key takeaway, right? Obviously, we have to consult all patients on photoprotection, but I like to say that the health benefits have to be tailored to individual group as well as individual patients. And for two reasons, right? One is, if you try to convince someone to do something and they don't find the relevant benefit, and they're going to ignore it. And second, we as dermatologists, we just don't have time to list all those benefits. And there are just 5 benefits listed about photoprotection on the slides. So we know that the use of sunscreen, SPF 15, a Dale Green study from Australia, they've shown over a 15-year period, if you use sunscreen SPF 15 and you use it every day, you can reduce melanoma risk by 50%, SCC risk by 20, 30%, and it's significant. But are we really going to spend the time in trying to convince an African-American individual who only has 1% incidence rate, and there are 50% of skin cancer that is found not in sun-exposed site? So that may not be effective message for the African-American, but it will be very effective for the North Norwegians or the Irish population, right? But I think what will be effective for the African-Americans and the darker individuals is preventing reversing sign of aging. Now, we know that Dale Green study also showed daily use of sunscreen SPF 15 can prevent signs of photoaging. And we, in the past, published a paper with the scientists in Neutrogena that showed SPF 30, if you use it for 1 year, you can actually reverse the sign of aging. And the group from Boston and Harvard, the lead authors, Maimon, in 2016, they basically show that if you use the population that have melasma, and that actually uses those individuals surveyed, the 67% of those people with melasma uses sunscreen. That's actually twice as much as the general population, right, to use sunscreen. So those are the message. Now, if you think about the science, again, pointing out to the incidence, 2% incidence for skin cancer for Asian, 1% for African Americans for skin cancer. But the incidence rate for autoimmune disease, such as lupus, is much higher in that population. So we should be talking to them. If there's individual in front of us who have autoimmune disease, we should be talking to them. We recently published a study that's a few years back with the UT Southwestern group that's shown that even in individuals with lupus, they don't use sunscreen at all, a large portion of them. Again, individual, let's say with hypertension, they're taking hydrochlorothiazide. That's the risk for photosensitivity. And those are the targeted message that I think we should deploy. Second take point message. The title of this talk focused on ethnicities, but I think it may be more productive if we focus on the skin tone. If you think about this, right, when we think about ethnicities, it's very well defined, but if you think about skin tone, it's a spectrum. If you think about the Northern Europeans compared to the Southern European, their Fitzpatrick skin type is a wide range. And Barbara, maybe you want to chime in on here. That is, I know recently Neutrogena folks have done a really interesting study talking about sunburn and skin tone. Do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. We are just wrapping up a study now. We conducted new research utilizing a consumer survey across more than 3,500 individuals that shows that people experience sunburn differently across ethnicities and skin tones. And so, for example, one of the insights that we uncovered is that respondents with skin type 5 were less likely to indicate skin color change as a sign of sunburn than those with lighter skin types. And they were more likely to report skin peeling as the top sign of their sunburn. And so, interestingly, also across ethnicities, African American respondents were less likely than Caucasian, Hispanic, and Asian respondents to report skin color change as a sign of sunburn. And again, the number one reported sign of sunburn among African American respondents was peeling skin. So it seems that identifying peeling as a key indicator of excess sun exposure is a way to tailor the communications when speaking with skin types 5 and African American patients.
That's really interesting. What about itching? Is there any signs of itching? Is that part of it or no?
We're still diving into the data. I mean, we did see some reports back on itching, but I don't think we have the breakout across our groups yet.
So I'm going to get to my last point, and before we let other speakers join in. And I pointed out this, I think it's, so I think we as a dermatologist, the American Academy of Dermatology and the Skin Cancer Foundation, various nonprofit government agencies have done a wonderful job in sort of educating the public about the importance of using sunscreen photo protection. And I think that in general, the public understand the benefit. But the problem here is we are trying to motivate individuals and thinking they're rational. But I think there's some real barriers right there. And I think we have to somehow think outside the box and get them to use some protection. So here's a study that we published, and actually was sponsored by the Neutrogena grant, independent research grant. That is, we just basically didn't tell the subject any benefits whatsoever. So all we did was we basically told the subject, one group to use sunscreen and the other group to put the sunscreen right next to the toothpaste. In the 6-week trial, the group that put the sunscreen right next to the toothpaste had 20% increasing usage, right? So I think sometimes we human beings are just rational, not rational, and we are creatures of habit, right? I think we need to tap into this habit and to improve compliance. That's hopefully, and I shed some light on this topic.